Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to Scenario 1, Episode 2 in our series Zero to Hero, where we explore the Lock and Load Publishing's Lock and Load tactical system over a number of scenarios, learning as we go and gradually increasing the complexity as we go along. Let's jump right back into the action. I think we can finish our first scenario today. Let's see how our German assault on this Russian village is going.
Here's a quick recap of our situation so far. We have, looking at an overview of our entire map here, the objective to this battle is that either side controls this village, controls the majority of the buildings in this village, which consists of these 4 buildings, wooden structures right here. The Russians started the battle, holed up in these structures. The Germans, with 2 platoons worth of infantry, came in from the west and have tried to take them. In our first episode, Lieutenant Garner and his infantry squad pushed forward at the end of the 3rd of 8 turns, engaged Lieutenant Macno and his infantry squad in this building here, trying to overtake it, but they were repulsed with heavy casualties. Lieutenant Garner was killed along with almost all of the men from his squad. Likewise, 2 German squads of infantry have been cut down, reduced to about half strength, and they're kind of trying to recover at the edge of the wheat field here. So as we start the second half of this scenario, we have the Germans depleted. They've lost 3 of their 7 platoons. They're unable to kind of gain a foothold in the village. The Russians still hold all of the structures, and more importantly, Lieutenant Garner, the leader of the Germans, is dead, which means that these squads will not be able to recover, making it kind of an even battle in terms of numbers, except the Russians hold the stronger defensive positions and they have their leader left. One of the things I mentioned I wanted to do with this series is to start new episodes with kind of some corrections or talk a little bit briefly about some of the rule mistakes that we might have made in the previous episode. Now, I'm always going to try to learn the new section of rules that we'll need for an upcoming scenario. But that being said, this is a series where mistakes are expected, especially with a system that's this complex. I'm happy to say we really didn't have any mistakes execution-wise with the rules. I'm sure we'll have some in the future as we kind of increase the complexity of our battles. But we were fortunate in the first battle that we really didn't have many. Didn't have any, really. We did have one procedural thing, however. When Lieutenant Garner and his infantry squad came into this hex here and engaged in melee, one of the things that you want to do at this point in time, Lieutenant Macno had fired, and I think I marked these with a moved counter because they had kind of moved in here. But instead of that, what you want to do is you remove those and mark the hex with a melee. That signifies that basically this hex is locked in melee, and that's important for some of the things that happen later, because even if these units are wiped out, this still holds the status of a melee hex until the administration phase at the end of the turn, which means that even though there's no living Germans in the hex, subsequently till after the melee, German units can't fire on this hex because you can't fire on a melee hex. This was pointed out by Michael de Merler, who kind of pointed out that procedurally that's always a good habit to get into, is as soon as you've got a melee situation in a hex, to designate it as such. So thanks to him for pointing that out. One of the other things I realized we can do with this series is to talk about tactical tips and advice too, and errors. This was pointed out by Jason Young, and I've recreated now the situation exactly at the end of the 3rd turn, just before we went into the administration phase, where the Germans had passed, I think the impulse had come to the Russians' initiative, so they had a choice to do something. All of these units, Russian units, had done something. All of the German units had activated and were done. The only thing that had the potential to act left in the turn was this Russian squad here, backed up in this building. And I had them just pass, which triggered the end of the turn. But Jason Young pointed out, and I kind of was thinking about this the next day when I woke up as well, it doesn't make sense for this unit from a tactical perspective for this unit to pass. Because what it could have done, because all the Germans had acted, it should have activated and tried to spot perhaps one of these units over here. We already determined the line of sight didn't work here. So it could have tried to spot one of these units, and then if it spotted it, it should have opened fire on it. And the reason is because when it opens fire, it would have lost its unspotted, its kind of hidden status, and these units would have been able to spot it. But the Germans units, even if they spotted it, they can't do anything in this turn because they've already acted. And the firing counter is removed at the end of the admin phase, which means in the next turn, this unit's going to go back to unspotted. So there's no loss potential at all for this Russian unit to try to open spot and open fire on one of these infantry units. There's nothing they can lose. There's only something they can gain. So from a tactical perspective, we should have activated this unit, tried to have it spot one of these, and then open fire if it did. A second tactical option here represents the battle when it was roughly at this stage, where what had just happened was the second squad had moved up to the edge of the wheat field here. These two German squads had kind of crawled up into position here. The Germans were basically positioning themselves to attack, and they had moved kind of halfway through turn 3. At this turn, the impulse passed to the Russians, and they passed because they didn't want to open fire here until they saw what this unit had done. Now, what eventually happened is the Germans moved forward with Lieutenant Garner and one squad, but they really didn't have the numbers to execute a strong melee attack in this attack right here. What probably would have done the Germans better is, instead of sending one squad up here to draw fire and then subsequently one squad up here to draw fire, I think it would have been better for the Germans to pass again, because that would have forced the Russians here, given them a choice. We would have had 2 consecutive passes, so the Germans pass, the Russians pass, the Germans pass. It goes back to the Russians. If they pass a third time, this turn ends, and turn 4 would start with all of these units active for the Germans and these units right in the edge. The Germans could have gotten a much better attack off in those kind of circumstances. So it would have been better tactically for the Germans to pass. They eventually probably could have gotten maybe a 2-to-1 or potentially a 3-to-1 melee attack on this building instead. Likewise, if the Russians had fired here with this Lieutenant Macno on this unit rather than passing, the Germans then could have had the option to push forward with another counter, and then move 2 of them up in here and get a 2-to-1 melee. So there were better options for the Germans, trying to, basically from a tactical perspective, trying to force them to coordinate their attack as one attack rather than kind of getting it fragmented like they did, which was basically a tactical error for them in that third turn. The last thing I was thinking about tactically was, rather than have to bring these units up to the edge of the wheat field and have them cowering behind them and things like that, we could have potentially had this infantry unit, for example, stay out of range of the Russians, because the Russian squads have a range of 4, while the German squads have a range of 6. We could have kept them, like, say, for example, 5 away, and tried to spot and open fire from distance on these Russian units in the buildings, because the Russians wouldn't have been able to answer that. It's not a really tremendously effective shot, but it wouldn't be unheard of that they could have had some impact on these Russian defenders and use kind of units at distance, perhaps, to have created some problems for the German forces trying to attack into the village itself. That's an option I kind of thought of after we had played this out as well. Also, at the beginning of this episode, I wanted to take a moment just to kind of do a mini tutorial, and I'll kind of try to mix these in as we go forward, on activation. And basically, this is kind of, I thought it might be helpful if you're learning the game to talk a little bit about the rules for activation, because it's a little bit nuanced. Now, when it's your initiative in the operations phase, you can activate a hex, basically. You can activate units in a hex. Now, the first thing to understand is that you don't have to activate all the units in a hex. If we had, say, for example, 3 Russian squads in this hex, we could activate 1 of them, 2 of them, or all 3 of them. And if we activate 1 of them, these other 2 can activate and do something in a later impulse later in the turn. So it's not like you lose the opportunity if you activate 1 unit in a hex. They can activate later. We could activate 2 units in the hex, or we could activate 3 units in the hex. Now, if we activate 2 units in the hex, they don't have to do the same thing. One of these units could fire, one of these units could move. Likewise, if we activated 3 units in the hex, we could say, okay, this one's going to move, and these 2 are going to fire. And that's fine. You can do that in the same impulse. However, what's important to understand is that if you activate units to do the same thing in a hex, say, for example, we have 3 units here, we're going to activate these 2 units to move and this unit to fire. Well, in that case, if the units that are activated together in the same impulse to move, they have to move together. So we couldn't say, okay, in this impulse, we're going to activate these 2 units to move. We're going to move 1 here and 1 here. You can't do that because you activated them in the same impulse. Therefore, they have to do the same move. Likewise, if we activated, say, these 2 units, all 3 units, say, to fire in the same impulse. We say we're going to fire with these 3 units in this impulse. We can't say 1 unit's going to fire here, 1 unit's going to fire here, 1 unit's going to fire off in that direction. They all have to fire at the same target. So, and we'll talk a little bit about how support weapons work with this when we get to support weapons. But if units in the same hex, in the same impulse, activate at the same time to move or to fire, they have to fire at the same target and they have to move in the same direction. And likewise, they can't both fire and move unless they're using like special assault movement and things like that. But we'll get to that when we get there. The other thing to remember is, say we had something like this. If you have a good order leader, who's got not wounded. A wounded leader can only activate within his hex, but a leader has the strength to activate units in adjacent hexes as well. So we could say we're going to activate this unit, the leader here, and we're going to activate one other squad in this hex, and we're going to activate this squad and this squad. We could activate all 3 squads in the same impulse because the leader has a leadership range of 1 and he can activate a bunch of units. So putting groups of units together with leaders can really lead to some strong moves where you can get a bunch of units, a bunch of squads doing the same thing in the same impulse. And that's basically a quick overview of the fundamentals of activation. There are some other subtleties with like multi-story buildings and caves and bunkers and stuff like that, but we'll kind of fold those in as we come to them. And with that in mind, it's time for us now to finish this battle. I think from the German perspective, I'm not quite sure what to do. I think we have to try to perhaps spot some units in here and hopefully we can get a lucky shot off and then maybe charge the building with these 2 squads to try to take something out. We need something to go in our favor. The German performance, say in the first half of the battle, in terms of their die rolls, was really poor as well. They got a lot of low rolls. Russians fired really well. The melee was just, even though it was a 50-50 chance, it just completely went sideways for the Germans. So yeah, their performance so far in the battle hasn't been that inspired. They'll need their kind of fates to turn to hopefully get something out of it. From the Russian perspective, I think it's more, don't interrupt your enemy when he's doing something stupid. It's just like, let them try to solve their own problems because the numbers and the advantage right now is all in the Russian favor. Let's get started with turn 4. So turn 4 gets underway, and we do need to roll for the initiative. As a reminder, the Germans have lost 1 squad, leader Lieutenant Garner, and they've had 2 of their full squads reduced to half strength. So some pretty significant casualties for our German attack force so far. Let's roll for initiative. We get a 6 for the Russians, a 4 for the Germans. Turn 4 initiative will go to the Russians. Let's figure out what we want to do for them. The Russians have a couple of options, I think, here, one of which is to pass. The other option would be to try to move out of one of these defensive positions and try to melee with one of these units, which would automatically wipe out the German unit. But I think that weakens their defensive position overall, and these shaken units without a leader in the action from the German side, they are no longer a factor in this combat. They can't do anything at all. So and they don't even spot the units adjacent to them because they're shaken. So they only create problems for the Russians to move out here and weaken their position. So we're not going to do that. Likewise, we could try to have units spot and then open fire on the infantry, but that will mean that their opportunity fire later would be weakened. We'll talk about that as we get there. So we're going to kind of just pass as the Russians and say, let's see what the Germans can do first. So now it's the Germans' option that they start out here, and they're looking over the scene. Their main thrust of the attack has been cut down. These 40 men here have to kind of regroup and figure out what they might be able to do. I think what we're going to try to do is see if we can get lucky and have this unit spot Lieutenant Machno and his squad hold up in this building right here. And again, spotting covers a whole hex, not a unit. If they could, and they could open fire and perhaps get some damage on them, then I think we can try to perhaps rush forward again with these units here and try to get in some melee situations. So that, I think, would be the best situation for this. We're going to have this squad here, grab some binoculars and see if they can try to spot Lieutenant Machno. The spotting roll really is on a 1 die. You need a 1 or a 2 to spot a unit in a blocking kind of terrain here. Oh, the Germans do get lucky. This squad spots Lieutenant Machno and his squad, and they can immediately open fire. So our German squad here, the only modifier it's got, really, it's going to roll 1 die for basically direct fire. It gets +1 for its inherent firepower, and there's nothing else that really applies to it. There's no leaders modifiers or any of the other stuff that kind of comes into bear. So for the Germans, we're going to roll 1 die and add 1 to it for their fire effectiveness. They're looking for a higher number than lower. Nice, they get a 5 plus a 1 is a 6. Now the Russians here defending in this building here, they get basically their 1 die roll plus whatever terrain modifier is here, and that's pretty much it. The leader modifier does not apply to this. So the wooden building they are in gives them a +3, however. This actually is a good roll for the Germans with a 6. Russians defending this die roll +3. They get 5 + 3. They have hunkered down effectively. So 5 + 3 is 8. The German attack was a 6. That means the German attack factor is lower than the Russian defensive factor. No effect. However, this unit is now spotted for the rest of the turn. So that does come into bear here in terms of what the Russians and Germans can do going forward. The initiative comes back to the Russians. We could do a bunch of things as the Russians, but we're still going to pass. I want to maximize the chances that we can prevent a German attack from rushing one of these buildings. The Russians pass, we go back to the Germans' initiative. Now the Germans could do whatever they want, but now that they've seen the Russians are passing here, I think what we're going to do is to pull these units back. They have a reduced movement now that they're shaken of 2. Just try to save some human lives here and get them out of the battle. It comes back to the Russians for the initiative. They are going to pass again. Likewise, we're going to move these shaken units out of the way in line of fire, give them a chance to recover and save the human lives that have been shattered in that initial attack. Initiative comes back to the Russians. They pass. We go to the Germans now. Let's have this unit here at the edge of the wheat field open fire on Lieutenant Makhno here and see if they can do some damage. So basically the same attack as we had before. It's 1 die roll plus this number right here. Germans looking for a big number. They don't get it. They get 3 + 1 is 4. The Russian modifier is +3. There's no way that this attack number can be bigger, but we'll roll it in any case. We get a 6. I quickly just wanted to check to see. I thought a 6 might start a fire, but that's if the attackers roll an unmodified 6, then it has a potential to start a fire in the place where that fire is going. But 6 + 3 is 9. 4 to 9 means that fire is ineffective. This unit has fired now, and now the initiative comes back to the Russians, and they can do some things here because they've got enough forces to start pouring on some fire here. Let's see if we can eliminate this threat right here first. We're going to have this squad hold up in the building, open fire on these units here. And they're spotted now because they've fired. So this is a +1 roll for the Russians. They open fire. They get a 4 + 1 is a 5. Germans are in the wheat field. There is no modifier here for them at all. They just need to be at 5 or greater to survive this. They get a 1. Once again, the Germans not doing a good job here defending. 4 + 1 is 5. 2 1 gives us a +4 damage check for the Germans here. This is Germans have just, when they've taken fire, they're absolutely fallen apart. Maybe these units are just green or something like that. But let's see what we get on the damage check roll here for the Germans. +4. We get a 4 + 4 is an 8. So this is greater than the morale of 5, but less than twice the morale of 5. So there's no casualties, but they are shaken, which means that they are essentially now out of the battle because there's no way we can rally these units without a leader. The Russians turning the table more in their favor at this point in time. We go back to the German impulse now. Things are looking very, very grim for the Germans. Okay, it's desperation time for the Germans. There's no way they can pull this off unless we get super lucky. We're going to throw everything at this. Now, I'm going to have these units charged. They're going to get cut down, I think. They need an extremely lucky roll to survive, but I don't see any other way forward for them to possibly pull this out. We could come here and try to charge. We could come here and try to charge. The disadvantage to coming here is that this is a 2 movement point expenditure, which means this unit and this unit could expend opportunity fire on them. That would be having to survive 2 opportunity fire attacks. Instead, we're going to come this way into the open. That's a 1 movement point move, so it means they can only take 1 attack, which will be this one to get the adjacency bonus. They don't get, by the Germans, by coming in the open, they don't get that bonus of being in the wheat field when they're moving on opportunity fire, but they only have to get attacked once instead of twice. I think it's the better chance, odds-wise. It's still not good, mind you. Immediately, the Russians here, Lieutenant Makhno, they open fire on these 20 men rushing their position. A last desperation attack here by the German attack force. The numbers are not good. Lieutenant Machno's modifier here can apply to this. That's +1. They have a firepower of 1. That's +2 then to the roll. And they're adjacent, which makes it +4. The Germans here are in the open, which means there's absolutely no terrain modifier for them. So they have to survive a +4 attack on them. If the Russians roll high here, it's pretty much over for this battle here. If they roll low, the Germans have a chance. Ooh, a 1, Lieutenant Machno. Maybe they're all shaken after that melee in the like 4 or 5 minutes before that. They fire terribly. 1 + 4 is a 5 for them. This gives our Germans hope, because if the fire attack power is equal to their morale or less, the fire is ineffective, which means they can come in here and melee. So essentially, the Germans in this defensive roll, they're going to get 1 die roll. They need to roll a 5 or a 6 to not have a damage check. If that happens and they don't get a damage check, they immediately can come in and cause melee. German attack, hanging in the balance, a 4. So 1 + 4 is 5. Still, it's not hopeless here. This isn't horrible for them. 1 + 4 is 5 to 4. So the attacker's die roll is 1 greater than the defenders, which means they just have a +1 damage check. So we're going to roll for each unit in here. We'll do the top one first and then the second one. +1 damage check on these units. Let's see what we get. The first one up here rolls a 2. 2 + 1 is a 3. That's the morale or less. This unit can continue. Let's roll a damage check on our second squad right now. 3. 3 + 1 is 4. Both of these units have no consequences on this check here. This unit is fired. The German hopes are coming alive here with this bold last-minute charge. They can now continue their move. They come in here on melee, so they move their second and third movement points to come in here. And as we have learned, we want to drop a melee marker on this hex right now. The battle rages on. Not only that, the Germans here have a relatively good advantage in terms of what's going on in odds. So let's conduct a melee now for this. Let's break this down. So we have 2 attack factors here, 2 inherent firepowers for the Germans against 1 for the Russians. So it's a 2-to-1 attack. This is actually looking really good for the Germans, because if we look on the melee success probability table, 2-to-1 means the kill number is 6 or greater. If they roll a 6 or greater, they have wiped out this squad, and by default, then we'll wipe out Lieutenant Machno. The brutality of house-to-house combat here, playing a bear. 2-to-1, they need a 6 or greater. They get a 7. So our squad is eliminated, and Lieutenant Machno dies as well. Defending here, however, again, the Russians get to attack back. Now, they can choose to attack both units at 1-to-2 or attack one unit at 1-to-1. You don't have to attack both units. Let me just double check that. Yes, so just confirming that now the Russians get to determine in their defensive attack, melee attack, whether they want to attack both units or one unit. We are going to concentrate on one unit, because I think as the Russians, that gives us the best chance to bring these units in the building next door to try to overwhelm them. So we're going to go 1-to-1 odds. The kill number is an 8. Lieutenant Machno's leadership number is added to the roll. So the Russians need a 7 or greater to take out one of the squads. Everything kind of hinges on this. They get a 9. Okay, so at the end of this battle right here, Lieutenant Machno and his squad have been wiped out. One of the German squads is wiped out. The Germans now control this hex, and it is still tagged under its melee status, so these units can't fire on it. The battle getting bloody and ferocious here. It now goes to the Russians' initiative here. What do we want to do? Let's do it. Let's be bold. Russians advancing right in here. They are going to move in here. The Germans have done all their movement with everything else, so there's nothing they can do to stop this. We're just going to have them rush right in and take the 2-to-1 odds on this melee. So the Russians surge into the house after the initial impulse of melee. We go to another round of melee. The Russians have 2-to-1 odds here on the Germans. There are no die roll modifiers because there's no leaders or anything else. The kill number is a 6 or greater. The Russian squad comes bursting in. They get a 6, just enough. The German squad's been eliminated. However, They get to return the favor here. We are going to have the Germans, we don't have a hope if we just get one Russian squad because these guys will be outnumbered. So we're going to do the 1 to 2 attack. So this German squad, in order to kind of take out both squads, we're going to attack both at 1 to 2 odds. The kill number is a 10. This is tremendous loss of life in this building right here. 1 to 2, we need a 10 or greater. A 7, it fails. So the Russians kind of counterattack here, wiping out the German attackers in the building, leaving the Russians with further, now they've got control of all the buildings in the town. And that turn is complete because everybody has acted. Wow, that was a frantic, what a crazy sequence of events there. 20 Germans wiped out, 10 Russians wiped out, Lieutenant Makhno wiped out as well. We go to the administrative phase for turn 4. We remove all of, whoops, not the unit, the marker itself. However, things rather bleak now for the Germans as that last gasp, that 1 to 2 attack, there was really what their last hope was. The Russians here now have 30 men in off-enemy building. They control all 4 buildings. The Germans only have 1 functional squad left. I think at this point in time, we might have the Germans concede the battlefield, or should we have them go down in one last heroic gasp here? We'll do it. Okay, let's go to initiative 5 here. So let's go to turn 5, see who has the initiative. Germans have the initiative at 3 to 1. So with the Germans having initiative, we flip the turn initiative marker over to them. We go to the rally phase, which nothing can rally because they're all the leaders are dead. And all of these units, we have heavy casualties now. 3 squads wiped out, a leader wiped out for the Germans, Russian squad down as well as their leader. So neither leader survives the day. Let's go to turn 5, the last heroic gasp of the German squad. So this is it, the last hope. I would probably, if there were any sense of preserving life for the future, I would be retreating now as the Germans, because this is not going to work, okay? But this unit squad's going to come out at the open. We're going to have them charge this building and try to wipe out the last Russians here. This squad immediately will do opportunity fire here to try to take out this squad coming across in the open. The firing strength is 1. This squad is moving, so it's a +1 added to it. So the Russian roll is this +2. Oh, they get a 6. 6 + 2 is 8. German squad moving in the open has no terrain modifier, so they have to equal that. Oh, gosh, these defensive rolls for the Germans with a 1, so it's 8 to 1 +7 morale check. This is it for the Germans right here. It's ended right now. So the +7 damage check, it's at least broken. 4 + 7 is 11. Which is between 2 and 3 times as great as their morale. So they suffer casualties. We have to see what unit they get reduced to. We roll a 2. That's even. So even means they get that lower factor here of infantry. So the 11, they get reduced to this half squad here. That's a 054 because they rolled that even number. This one is taken out of play and they are shaken as well. That ends their forward movement because they are shaken. So this unit now is tagged with a movement factor. This one's tagged with a fired. And yeah, it's at this point in time, it's pretty much over for the Germans here. That was opportunity fire. The German phase is over. The Russian phase is up. We're going to have the Russian squad here come out 1, move into this wheat field here. Now, this is a melee situation, so we're going to tag it with a melee status marker. However, this is not a melee capable unit, so it's immediately wiped out. So the German squad is eliminated. We still tag this with melee, and that unit's turn ends. We go now to the Germans here. We could try to have them run and flee from the battlefield. That's probably what they would do. But at this point in time, there's no way the Germans can win. It would be kind of them trying to retreat off the board. These units can come over and kind of one by one just eliminate them, and assuming like capturing them as prisoners and things like that. So this battle at this point in time, we are going to call it over because the Germans cannot possibly win. The Russians have taken the day, all centering on this crazy crazy melee sequences that happened over the span of about 10 minutes, with that Lieutenant Garner and his squad getting wiped out, 20 men charging forward and making it forward and actually wiping out the Russian defenders there, but then Russian reinforcements from the building beside them surge in. Another melee combat assumes in the kind of goes off in the building here. The Russians succeed for that one, which tilts the odds finally in their kind of determined favor, and that ends the German assault on the village here. Thanks so much for watching. Tactical tips, tactical advice. Are there any errors we made? Lots of things going on. We had melee, we talked about spotting and things like that. So quite a variety kind of, I think we got a good look here in this first scenario at a lot of the core rules in this game. In the next scenario, I'm going to add some more complicated terrain, some different types of terrain, and we're going to bring in support weapons, machine guns, I think a flamethrower, maybe a satchel charge, something like that, maybe some fixed positions. So we're going to kind of ramp up the complexity of the terrain and then bring in support weapons. Roughly, I'm thinking scenario 3 will just be vehicles, then maybe scenario 4 will be a mix of vehicles and kind of ground units, leg units. But I'm not quite sure yet. I'm open for suggestions as well. If you do see mistakes and errors, I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. I'll put a link to the next episode in the Series 0 to Hero series as soon as it's ready. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.